Hey, that was a great class today. I wanted to talk to you about something that caught my attention because as soon as I saw it on the screen, I was just like, "Oh, that's not me. That's not my lecture." So, do you remember when we were going through the old time photographs on eBay, and then there was one of the images was of an enslaved woman. I was emotionally overwhelmed at that time, and I should have talked about it, but that's why I'm taking the opportunity to talk about now. Do you remember when in the first class we talked about how to objectively look at information? So, the purpose, the author, the intended audience, and things like that. I wanted to show you an example of how you could do that in a practical sense. So, when you're looking at the Korean monuments, you may be confronted with minority, really troublesome opinions that are just like they're not you at all, and you're just like, how do I even put this in? So I want to, in scholarship, I want to come across with the idea that every voice is included, but you, the author, are allowed to contextualize it. So when I saw that photograph of an enslaved woman, um, I looked at it subjectively, right? I became emotional, I became embarrassed, I became very cognizant of all of the students in the classroom, and I'm just like, I didn't know what to say. How do I objectively come to a different direction with that? Well, if you think about it like going into a doctor's office, they're looking objectively at whatever's going on with you. Say you have like a broken arm or something like that. They're not going to be going, oh, the pain. Oh, I really sympathize with you. No, they're like, well, okay, how do we move on from that? How do we heal? How do we address the pain? How do we address the broken arm? How do we mitigate a whole bunch of different ideas? They do it objectively. They don't say what's the purpose of this fracture, but they say, well, what's the purpose of this person being in the doctor's office? So what exists and what is important is different for everybody, right? We looked at that with identities of individuals, cultures, communities, societies, and you're allowed to contextualize them in whatever way that you want. So when we have a picture from the 1840s of an enslaved person that I find the whole practice of slavery is just reprehensible. I could barely talk about it. And I want to just like make it go away. But at the same time, I want to make sure it stays as a point of how far we've come, how far we have to go, long-term effects, the discrimination, racism, um, the voices of the oppressed, all sorts of different things need to be heard. So, what the purpose of the information, initially, I looked at the image again. And it was the one on eBay that proposed that this person was a nanny. And they were dressed up in fine clothes, and so was the baby. And it was kind of like, well, that doesn't really strike me as like what you would normally see in a slave environment, like a forced labor environment. Typically, they don't bother to spend a lot of money on clothes or taking care of somebody or even photographing them. So I was like, well, what's the purpose? Maybe this is propaganda. So to objectively look at it, I looked up pro-slavery propaganda. And so instead of relying on my own subjective background, I found, and the photo was from the 1840s. I know that because I'm a history of photography guy. But part of the explanation for the growth of pro-slavery propaganda, where you show it in a normalized, positive light, it's kind of, again, one of those social constructions where like, hey, slavery's okay. The reason, so it exists for one thing, but an explanation for the growth of it was the rise of anti-slavery movements in America and beyond. So they were protecting, um, and they were intending this to go to audiences who were anti-slavery. So that's an objective way of looking at it. So all of a sudden, it's not about me, and I can look and see that there was other people like me that were anti-slavery, and it was just kind of like it's a lot easier to look at it that way, and I can move towards a positive, objective direction. Another one where I was just like, one of the arguments that I found was that, in this propaganda, they're like, slaves are better off here than they are in many places in the world. And I was just like, well, come on. I rolled my eyes at that. But I looked up and I found that 150 years later, in Southern counties, this article was published in Journal of Black Studies in 2022, that in Southern counties where slavery was denser, Black life expectancy remains proportionally lower. There's still health outcomes. Life was not good, and the effects of that are still bad. Did you see how I did that? When you're looking at your Korea monument, it might be tempting to like screen out some of the voices that are dissident or racist or problematic, contextualize them in scholarship or in the evidence of like why they exist. And that helps the conversation. So we're not doing a propaganda piece here where the monument is this all-seeing, all-telling, wonderful thing for everybody, but we're looking at it objectively, inside and out, good and bad. So thanks for watching this far, and I hope you have a nice day.